It's amazing what humans can do. They excel at so many different things. You know, the Winter Olympics just recently happened, and it's amazing to just watch the athletic precision and ability of some of these people, how much skill and talent that they have at certain things. But there's one thing that I think almost every human is really good at, and that is comparison. You know, we spend most of our lives comparing various things to different things. Like if you're trying to figure out where to go out to eat, you're going to compare different restaurants and figure out which one you want to go, what feels good. If you go to a store, you're going to compare to different prices of different foods to try and find the best deals to fit your budget and fit your needs. If you follow sports, you're going to compare the stats of different sports teams, and you're going to compare the stats of different athletes to see which one's the greatest of all time, or which team is going to have the better outcome this season. Our life is filled with comparison. It's just what we do. And sometimes that posture of comparing things to one another enters into how we view ourselves and how we view other people. A lot of times when we see other people, sometimes we can find ourselves saying things like, man, they have such a good life. I wish I could just have a little bit of what they have. Or we look at their marriage or their kids, or we look at certain dynamics within their life, and we think, man, they just seem to have things more put together than what I have. On the other side, we can flip that, and a lot of times that's where we find ourselves too, where we look at other people and we compare our lives to theirs, and we can't help, maybe we don't say these words, but we can't help but think sometimes, man, I'm so glad my life isn't their life. I'm so glad that I have made the correct decisions in life and I haven't made all the different mistakes that they've made. I'm so glad that I have what I have and I don't have to deal with what they're having to deal with. Sometimes even we compare our spirituality to others' spirituality. And this is not something that's just new to humans in the 21st century, but Jesus himself observed that this was a posture that people in his day and in the realm of God's people were dealing with too. That there was people in God in his day that were finding themselves comparing themselves to other people. And so Jesus, as a response, he ends up sharing a short story to them. He shares a parable to help them. Luke, he frames it in this way. He says this in Luke 18. He says, he also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and looked down on everyone else. Jesus, he observes how God's people are acting, and he notices that there are some that were trusting in themselves who were righteous. Now, we often look at this and we think that Jesus is about to share a story. He's going to share a parable towards people who are self-righteous, people who are legalistic in their view and thinking of life. But as we kind of observed last week and we talked briefly about, the Jewish world, people during this time did not have that mindset when it came to their view and relationship with God. They believed that they were born into God's grace, into God's covenant, and that they were to maintain good favor with God by faithfully following him. And as a result, as a response to God's grace, you are going to keep his ways and honor his law. And Jesus notices that there are some people who are especially trusting in themselves. That's not really a great translation, though. You know, the word for trusted in, it can be translated a number of different ways. Maybe a better translation, a more accurate translation to how we understand the Jewish world might be, he also told this parable to some who were confident in themselves that they were righteous. And there were some people that they could view their list of righteous acts and they could say with confidence, I am certainly one of God's people. I certainly have God's favor on me because I keep the path of the righteous. But as a result, that led to some people looking down on everyone else. What Luke is saying Jesus is noticing is that people are playing the comparison game. That as they observe other people who are not maybe doing as many faithful acts as they are, it ends up causing themselves to build themselves up. But at the same time, it tears and pushes other people out. That this was a way for them to reinforce their own righteousness. That by looking at other people, they could have even more confidence and take more pride that they surely were in God's favor compared to these other people. You see, what ends up happening is that righteousness becomes a boundary marker. It becomes a boundary marker to signify who is in, who has God's grace, who is in God's community, and who is out, who is outside of God's favor. And as Jesus notices this comparison game happening, as he notices that some people are viewing others with contempt as they are confident, he shares a story. A story that we will call today the story of two praying men. And for us to look at this story with fresh eyes, for us to live in the world of this time, for us to feel the power and conviction that Jesus wants us to feel as we hear this story, we're going to look at it from a different angle today. We're going to follow this story along, and if you have a Bible, you can join us in Luke 18, which is where this story takes place. We're going to look at this narrative, this parable, through the perspective of one of these men, a man named Simeon the Pharisee. I just can't get over what happened this morning. I've gone to the temple thousands of times to pray to God. I know the rhythms, I know the prayers, I know the routines, but what happened this morning, it was unsettling. It bothers me to my bones. I'm a Pharisee. I've lived my entire life learning God's law and trying to keep God's law as faithfully as I could. Even from a young age, I was taught and I believed that if God was to ever restore Israel to their goodness, if God was ever to send his Messiah to rescue and save us, then it would be because every man and woman in Israel took seriously God's commands again. And so I have played my part to make that happen. I have lived faithfully to God's law as best as I can, as precise as I can, as exact as I can. And I've tried my best to teach other people the same way, that same posture of faithfulness. But something this morning at temple, it's made me uncomfortable. The morning was like no other. I was going up to temple at the third hour of the day for our Tamid service. It was going to be a wonderful time. It's my favorite part of the day. It's my favorite part of the day because I gather with the rest of God's people in prayer and worship to our Lord and God. It's a wonderful time to be together. And as I got there and entered the temple courts, I was greeted by many people. I shook hands. I visited with and shared words with some wonderful people in the temple courts. But just as we were about to get started, as we were preparing our hearts and our posture for the priest's benediction and for the sacrifice of atonement that will be happening shortly, he showed up. That sinner showed up. Who? A tax collector. Yeah, you heard me right. A tax collector in the temple? Yeah, that's an oxymoron if you've ever heard one. Like, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, a tax collector thinks he has the ability and freedom to come and join God's people for worship and prayer that morning? I mean, give me a break. He betrayed his people to side with the Romans. He betrayed God in doing that. And he still extorts us of our money and robs us day after day after day. I mean, he's worse than even the prostitutes. So I smirk as I see this tax collector just stroll on in, stumble in even as he makes his way in. Because this just doesn't make sense. He certainly can't be one of God's. And as he comes in, he kind of walks off to the side and he just doesn't even look at anyone. Everyone's kind of awkwardly trying to make side glances but doesn't want to make eye contact. No one is wanting to go and greet him. He's just sheepishly off to the side. And then come the whispers, the echoes of whispers in the temple courts. That man, he robs us of our money. Now he wants us to rob our time with God. I heard that he had Joshua arrested last week. He's not one of us. And I was a little worried about how this Tamid service was going to go. And you might look less favorably on us, but you can't blame us. You got to understand, this is a tax collector. He is the worst of the worst. He's worse than prostitutes. He betrayed his own people. He stabbed us in the back for his own goodwill. He just did away with everything that he should be honoring. He is one of the wicked. He is on an unfaithful path away from God. And he thinks he can come in to temple to worship. No, that's not how it is. I mean, I'm a Pharisee. I know what it means to live faithfully to God's law. I've spent my entire life dedicated to teaching other people how to live faithfully to God's law. And that tax collector certainly doesn't fit that description. And can you blame me, really? I mean, don't you understand? Wouldn't you do the same thing? After all, you look like someone who's trying to live faithfully by God's ways in your life. Wouldn't it bother you if a sinner entered your place of worship and just acted like everything was fine, even though you know what they have done? Wouldn't you be tempted to make some comments to the person next to you? Maybe you'd nudge them with your elbow and you'd have them try and glance over to say, who is over there? I don't want to admit it with the tax collector, but him being in the temple that moment, it was just a big distraction. It kind of felt like an eyesore from what we were trying to do in that moment. Maybe you've felt that way before too when you've seen certain people come in. But the service continued, and as we were continuing to prepare our hearts, we led into our normal prayer time, our corporate prayer time. And really quickly, everyone started to, as they normally do, lift their eyes up to heaven and their arms up to heaven and began praying to God. And so, of course, I joined in with them in this moment. I began to pray to God, and I say, God, I come here before you, thanking you for the life you've given me. Thank you for your grace and your mercy in showing me the right path. I could feel other people's eyes glancing my way. Oftentimes people hear me and listen to when I pray. There was in fact one time one lady, she talked with me, and afterwards she said, your voice is like honey. What a nice comment. So beautiful and humbling to hear that from someone. And I love to pray in the temple courts with the people of God, not necessarily for the attention I can receive, but because I love to be able to put into words the gratitude towards God that we all are experiencing. And so I continue my prayer. I say, God, thank you. I thank you so much for keeping me on the path of the righteous. Yes, I have lived my life trying to be faithful to you and your ways, and I thank you that I have not been led astray to be on the path of corruption in our world, of deceit and lies, but instead, I am not like any of those sinners. I am not one who is greedy. I am not unjust. I'm not an adulterer. I'm certainly not like that tax collector over there. I couldn't help but make the comparison in the moment. It was just so clear. I mean, me, who's a Pharisee, who's lived his life with full of righteous acts, a list of just different things I've done to live faithfully and obedient to God, versus this tax collector who just has a rap sheet full of unfaithfulness and wickedness and corruption over and over. I mean, if anyone else was in the temple and they would see what faithfulness and corruption looked like, the comparison was clear in front of their faces. And apparently I wasn't the only one that thought that, because others in the room began nodding in quiet agreement. Because after all, if anyone would compare themselves to that nasty tax collector, they would surely see that they were way better off than he was. I continued to pray. I continued to lift up thanks. God, I love your law. I try and keep your law to the best of my ability. In fact, I go above and beyond what your law requires. You ask us to fast once a year. I go ahead and fast twice a week. You ask us to give 1/10 of what we earn. I give 1/10 of everything I have. God, I love your law. I love your ways, and I want to keep them. And thank you for your law. And so, Father God, as we enter this time where we prepare and wait for the atonement sacrifice, thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your law. Thank you for keeping me on a path of righteousness instead of those that follow the path of the wicked. As I put my hands down, I can't help but feel so happy. It's like God's favor washes over me as I remember who I am and the confidence I have in being one of God's righteous, faithful people compared to that tax collector. And I turn to the side, and I notice something odd going on with him. He's shaking relentlessly. I thought maybe he's angry at me. Maybe I've embarrassed him a little bit. Maybe I pushed it too far in comparing myself to him in my prayer. But no, I looked a little closer. His whole entire face was crunched in close. He wasn't angry. He looked remorseful. And as I kept watching, as he continued to shake, he never once lifted up his eyes to heaven. Instead, there became a sound that has haunted me for hours on end after I heard it. He began to beat his chest in grief. Thud, thud, thud. And then he began to whisper a prayer. At this point, all eyes were on him. The room had gone silent. I could just barely make out what he said. He just said, "God, have mercy on me, the sinner." And I rolled my eyes. I mean, who does he think he is? A tax collector comes to the temple wanting to come before and join God's people in worship and prayer, and he thinks he can just beat his chest and ask God for mercy? Do you know who he is? Does he know who he is? He thinks he can be received by God after all he's done? After all of his acts of wickedness, after him straying on his path of corruption, and he thinks he can receive the repentance and the mercy from God that is only meant for God's children? Give me a break. The rest of the service went without any issues. The priest came up, he gave his benediction, he offered the offering, and then we all exited the temple. And I watched as people left, as I stood on the temple steps. And there was that tax collector coming out. But this time, he looked different. He wasn't remorseful anymore. he was at peace. And even though we're hours away from this moment, I can't get it out of my head. The tax collector being in the temple, his grief, his remorse, the thumping of his chest, the peace of mind that he was at afterwards, it's confusing. It doesn't make sense. I mean, who does he think he is? He's certainly not like me, a Pharisee who's lived his life following God. Versus him, this man that has walked on the path of the wickedness, where he's followed corruption, where he has done everything he can to betray God, betray me, rob us of everything we have. And he thinks he can just come in, this sinner. I mean, at least he knew who he was, that he was the sinner. I mean, out of everyone in the room, he is the sinner. At least he could recognize who he was. I mean, he has the largest list of misdeeds and unfaithfulness. And he thinks he can come in and expect mercy from our God, that he can make repentance happen during a service where we expect mercy from God and his atonement sacrifice, where he comes before God, our God who is compassionate, our God who is merciful, our God who forgives sinners. No, that doesn't justify him. I'm still in the right here. I'm a Pharisee. You can look at everything I've done. I have followed God's law faithfully. I've kept it down precisely. I am the one that can prove my righteousness. In fact, I proved to God my righteousness in my prayer. I showed God that I love him. I love his law. I have kept it faithfully. That I have kept on the path of righteousness he has led me to. And I was not like those who have followed the path of corruption. In my prayer, I was not like that man I compared myself to. That prayer where I ended up looking down upon the tax collector who was coming in and flung himself to God's mercy, knowing exactly who he is, knowing exactly what people would view him as, and yet came forward anyway. Oh. It reminds me of something I heard the other day. There was a teacher from up north in the temple that day. I think his name was Jesus of Nazareth. And he said something that day that I didn't understand at first. He said, "The one who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted." I'll admit that didn't make much sense to me when he said it. But maybe after this morning, this bothers me. Maybe after this morning, I can understand that a little more. I'm the one he was talking about. I'm the one who has exalted myself. I'm the one who had confidence in who I was because I could look at that tax collector and say, if he's not that, then I'm surely this. This morning, I thought I was going to temple to stand before God, but in reality, I was just standing above that man. I've messed this up so much. Yeah, I thought that if I could just live faithful to God and prove myself before him, then that's all that matters. But what ended up happening this morning, that when I thought that I was doing that, all of my faithful acts, all of my righteousness, all of my time following God's ways, it effectively meant nothing the moment that I looked at him with contempt. Maybe it was actually that tax collector who left the temple justified this morning and not me. Oh. I've kept enough of your time. I probably need to get going. I got to really spend some time thinking about this. I might even need to go find that man and apologize to him as I think about the mess I've made. As I leave here this morning, please, though, let me leave you with some wisdom. I don't know where you're at in your walk with God. You might be like me, where you've been trying to live and abide by God's laws faithfully. You're trying to be faithful to his ways and keep him well. And please keep doing that. Continue the path of the righteous. But maybe there's times where you run into and see other people who might be on a path that you think's towards corruption. A path where they have made wicked, problematic ways in the past. And you use that as a moment to raise yourself up and tear them down. Maybe there's times where they even enter your place of worship and you look down on them with contempt and say, they surely can't be one of us. They surely can't receive God's favor after all they've done. Please heed my warning. Comparison creates confidence, but confidence quickly turns into contempt.